You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political journalists for the Financial Times and The Sun, Jasmine, Cameron-Chilesche and Noa Hoffman. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Eye reports Liz Truss will encourage her party to put on a united front as many polls show Labour far ahead. It's the same story for The Express. Their headline, Rebels urged to stop plots and show loyalty. But The Guardian understands there's a growing rebellion in the Tory ranks over the policy not to have state benefits rise in line with inflation. The Star hears people are heading to bakeries in an attempt to stay warm amid the cost of living crisis. The Metro describes the retaliatory attacks after the destruction of the bridge linking Crimea and the Russian mainland as a display of the wrath of Putin. Same story in The Telegraph, which reports that Mr. Putin has described the attack as an act of terrorism by Ukraine. The Mail turns to so-called woke culture, which it claims is now pervading universities and forcing them to change the way they teach several subjects. The US Treasury Secretary has described the decision of the OPEC nations to cut production as unwise, according to the Financial Times. And The Sun says the next series of The Crown is likely to prove controversial as it shows Prince Philip pursuing an affair. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Jasmine, Cameron-Chilesche and Noa Hoffman. Welcome to you both. Let's start with The Eye and their story essentially saying that the Prime Minister's scrambling to save her premiership at this early stage. Jasmine.
Yeah, so Liz Truss is on a bit of a charm offensive this week. So we know she's got PMQs where she'll face up against Labour leader Keir Starmer. We know that she's also due to face backbenchers in the 1922 committee. She'll have a cabinet meeting later this week. So it's been a very rocky start for Liz Truss. Obviously, she was elected PM and then she had the death of the Queen and the fallout from her mini budget. And we saw from last week's Tory party conference that actually the party isn't very unified at the moment. We had cabinet ministers openly disagreeing with each other. We had senior backbenchers such as Michael Gove openly criticising the government, and we also had the U-turn. So she's now in a position where she really has to win over her MPs and convince them of her agenda. And it's important to note that Truss has this huge parliamentary majority, but it's not because of her personal popularity with either the public or MPs. It's a legacy from Boris Johnson, who managed to gain this majority in the 2019 general election by winning over voters in the so-called red wall and blue wall seats. And so she's got this huge majority, but it really seems like she's losing political capital and political goodwill among her backbenchers. And she's got a few pieces of tricky legislation, whether that's on benefits or fracking or trying to get some of her economic policies pushed through. And she's really going to need to have MPs on side in order to actually get that through the House of Commons.
And no, it does really seem as though she's bending to pressure. The article suggesting that she's going to be delaying reforms to persuade plotting backbenchers. The Eye says one veteran MP has said to them, "We will get rid of her. I can't see how she sacked and ostracised anyone who didn't support her," and expects to carry on. Most of us don't think Truss is very good.
Yeah, she really is in quite a predicament at the moment. Jasmine was absolutely right. However, I don't see a way forward for her and a way for her to reunite the party without fundamentally changing the policy platform and the ideological standing on which she stood for the Tory leadership, which is quite a sort of hard right libertarian worldview that differs quite differently from that of Boris Johnson, who was the democratically elected Prime Minister. And we've seen MPs point that out, such as the former cabinet heavyweights, Nadine Dorries, Grant Shapps, Michael Gove. So if she does want to unite her party, and I'm sure she does, it will probably involve a massive retreat from those values that she holds very closely to her going back years.
That's going to make her seem weak, though, isn't it, Jasmine?
I think so, but also there is an element of being realistic. It's quite striking. You noted the quote on the front of the Eye that actually senior MPs are openly speculating about Truss's future, how long she's going to last, who will replace her. And she's only been in power for what, maybe just over a month? It really does show that she's in quite a politically weak position. And bear in mind that, this is a party that was filled with infighting at the end of Johnson's premiership. And the argument put forward by Tory MPs is that actually, there were better leaders waiting in the wings. Truss would be able to unify the party, be able to put the party and the country back on track. And the past month has been pretty chaotic. And I think that her team around her will have to be incredibly realistic. They'll have to look at the polls. A lot of MPs, especially those who are potentially facing Lib Dems, those MPs in the red wall part of the UK facing Labour, they'll be worried about their seats. They'll be worried about the upcoming general election. And so I think there is an element of actually having to be a bit realistic and recognise that there has been a strong reaction to some of her policies, and she's going to have to adapt and U-turn on some of those if need be.
And the suggestion is that people are plotting against her, that there are rebels plotting against her. The Express saying that they're being told to stop that and to show loyalty. But can you order loyalty, Noa?
Well, I suppose that's the job of the chief whip, and the Wendy Morton's critics say she's doing quite a poor job of that. There's been some discussion of her being replaced in the role, given how Tory party conference played out, which was quite amazing, really. I'm just thinking back to the Conservative Party conference at Manchester and thinking about how that went when it was sort of peak Boris. Everyone was united behind him. He was sort of the king of the party, versus what we saw in Birmingham, where we had cabinet ministers going rogue, and we had backbenchers coming out the woodworks to, decry the policies that Liz Truss was putting forward. She needs a really, really strong whip in place to, get the party into shape, get the party behind her. And we've seen some of that come out this weekend in the papers. We've had cabinet ministers go to all the main sort of national newspapers, and their line is, get behind Liz Truss or get ready for a Keir Starmer government. Now, is that going to be enough? I'm not sure. I've spoken to some MPs who have told me, actually, they're solely focused on retaining their seats right now, rather than, sort of keeping the Conservative Party up in the polls. They're just focused on their constituency and sort of surviving the next election, rather than the wider goal of the Tory party winning. So it's just a huge mountain to climb, and whether she can do that remains to be seen.
Jasmine, and then the point that I was making is if you have to order loyalty, it rather suggests that you do not have the loyalty of the people that you're working with.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's important to note that Truss has effectively filled her cabinet with loyalists and those who are aligned with her on her economic vision and political vision for the country. But she's got backbenchers filled with, individuals such as Nadine Dorries, who were always supportive to people like Boris Johnson. You've got former cabinet heavyweights such as Michael Gove, Rishi Sunak. So she's got quite a sceptical House of Commons to deal with. And I think it's important to touch on Noa's point that actually MPs are hearing from their constituents. They're getting emails, they're getting letters of constituents worried about the rising costs of servicing their mortgages, their rising costs of energy bills, and they're really worried about some of the economic impact of Truss's policies. And actually, at the end of the day, if the public has lost confidence in Truss and has lost confidence in the government, it doesn't really matter what the whipping operation is like, because people will turn out in the polls against the Tories. There is an element of, MPs are trying to be a bit more cynical and they are thinking about protecting their own seats. But it does come down to the fact that if the public doesn't like your policies, that will eventually impact a party at the polls, regardless of whatever you tell MPs to say to the public.
And the cost of living crisis looming large over many of her problems. The Star taking a little bit of an irreverent look at that. Their headline, "Let Them Heat Cake." And this story about people going to bakeries to actually keep warm, Noa.
Yeah, it's absolutely tragic, and it's not their fault. Working people, hardworking Brits aren't responsible for Putin's war in Ukraine, for the COVID pandemic, for perhaps economic mismanagement, and all the sort of global factors as well that have left us where we are. And it's the job of government to come in, to step in and protect us where we can't protect ourselves from these sort of crises. I think if you have people, as the Star reports, having to go to bakeries to get warm, that's going to stick in their mind at a general election. They're going to think, will a Labour government mean that I have to go to my local library, to my local sort of town hall to stay warm, or will I be okay in my home? Now, in fairness to the government, they have introduced an energy price guarantee, which is really important, and it is such a great step forward. It will see prices capped at £2,500. Now, that is not an absolute cap. It could be, some people could go a bit over or a bit under, but they have stepped in to do something. Now, when you see people heading to bakeries to stay warm, and you see policies such as bankers' bonuses being lifted, the optics of the two, when you put them together, is kind of what's led us to this mess in the Conservative Party in the first place, what's led us to these sort of rebellions and this discomfort among the backbenchers. And stories like this are very striking for those reasons. So, and I suspect we'll see more of them to come.
Yes, bankers' bonuses juxtaposed with people going to bakeries to keep warmer makes the point, doesn't it? Thank you both for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, as the next series of The Crown looks set to depict Prince Philip pursuing an affair. We'll discuss that next. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Jasmine, Cameron-Chilesche and Noa Hoffman. Ah, there you are. I thought you'd deserted me for a moment. Let's start with you, Jasmine, this section, having a look at the Metro. Their headline, Wrath of Putin, and this is this attack on domestic apartments in Zaporizhia by the Russians following on from the blowing up of the Crimea Bridge.
Yes, it's quite a harrowing Metro front page, and it really speaks to a President Putin who's essentially been emboldened by the attack. I mean, this is a bridge that was strategically important for Russia, and it marks, a bit of humiliation for someone like Putin, who expected it to be pretty easy to defeat the Ukrainian forces. And I think the big question for Western officials looking on is actually, what does President Putin do from here? I mean, he's increasingly backed himself into a corner. We know the Ukrainian army aren't backing down. President Putin has to go back to the Russian people and present to them a win, has to give the impression that this is a war that Russia is ultimately going to emerge victorious. And so it's unsurprising to see that he's lashing out and becoming more violent in the form of these civilian attacks. And I think it just speaks to the fact that actually this conflict is growing increasingly convoluted, and it's increasingly difficult to see an easy way out that is relatively peaceful at this point.
OK, because of time, I'm just going to move on to our last story, and this is The Crown, the new series and their depiction of Prince Philip. Noa, take us into this.
Yeah, so the series has come under a bit of fire by some royalists who say that it is perhaps a bit insensitive to be depicting Prince Philip's affair so quickly after Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth passed away, which Netflix is due to do when the new series of The Crown comes out on November 9th.
What are your thoughts on this, Jasmine? Are you a fan of The Crown?
I mean, actually, embarrassingly, I've never watched it, not even one episode. I mean, I do think that the timing is slightly awkward, but, to a certain extent, there's always public interest in the royals, what they're wearing, who's having an affair with who. And so I can understand why Netflix has chosen to capitalise on this moment of heightened public interest in the royals and actually, push forward for this. But I can, on the flip side, appreciate that if you're a royalist, you do think, actually, it's a bit insensitive. This can hang on for a couple of months. It doesn't have to be shown now.